Thank you all for coming. Very much appreciate you taking the time to come to see us today and get a little look at the museum. So I'm going to start off with some introductions here. My name is Eugene Vicknair. I am one of the board of directors here. I'm actually the corporate secretary for the Featherville Rail Society, the operators of the Western Pacific Railroad Museum. And I'd like to just go around the room really quick, everyone introduce themselves, talk about what, let us know who you're with so everybody can see who's here. We'll start with our museum president, Greg Ellams.
I'm a former WP employee, worked for 39 years on the railroad on the other side of the fence. Then when I retired, guess what? It doesn't pay as well here. Yeah, I'm on the board and currently the president.
All right.
I'm Board Westmoreland. I'm with Clueless News.
I'm Pat Horton. I work in City of Portola.
Bruce Ross, I'm the district director for California State Senator Brian Dahle.
Oh, Doug McCoy, I'm the CEO for Eastern Zephyr.
I'm Warren Bennett. We own this property next door and support it.
Steve?
Oh, Steve Lee. I'm just a member. Carry around big hammers and stuff like that.
Actually, Steve's being modest. He's retired from the Union Pacific Railroad. He was the head of their steam program. So, Matt?
Matt Parker. I used to be somebody, but now I'm nobody. Volunteer, been away for a couple of years, but I'm back now.
Yes.
Tim Hauserman. I'm a writer in Tahoe for the Tahoe Weekly.
Joe Francis, KOH in Reno. And this is my wife, Karen.
Hello.
Jim Murphy with the City of Portola.
John Hodgson, board's partner, and we have the property next door.
I'm Kevin Gates. I work for Mountain Valley Living magazine up here.
And then in the back, we just had our Vice President, Steve Habeck, come in. And then our media representatives, Michael and Patty Clausen of Big Fish Creations. They helped me set all this up. So, well, thank you, everyone. So we're going to, as you saw your itinerary, we're going to start off with a little introduction here, kind of talk about the museum, where we came from, what we're doing right now, and our future plans, which is a big thing. A lot of you folks here, hoping we can get together and move some of these things forward. We have some big ideas and some very big things happening. I've got a couple special announcements I'm going to be making here that are long time in the works. But to kind of understand the Western Pacific Railroad Museum, we got to step back a little bit, and I'm going to give you a little history of the Western Pacific Railroad. Now, a lot of you have been here before, but some of you see some new faces. So I'm going to give you a little history of where all this came from. So the Western Pacific Railroad was born in 1903 as a response to the Southern Pacific Railroad, which dominated transportation and politics here in California in the late 1800s. By 1900, it was under the control of a gentleman named Edward H. Harriman, who famously believed in monopolies, did not like competition, and when he learned the Western Pacific was being built, walked up to the financier George Gould and said, "If you build that railroad, I will kill you." So Harriman, you can see his map of the Western U.S., all the lines in red were controlled by the Harriman interests. George Gould, son of the famous financier Jay Gould from New York, he controlled a set of railroads that came from the East Coast and stopped at Salt Lake City. And he wanted to strike right at the heart of the Southern Pacific monopoly. So he got together with a group of investors in California led by a guy named Walter Bartnett. They owned a little coal hauling railroad in the Bay Area. And they came up with the idea to build the Western Pacific Railroad. It was all financed through the Rio Grande Railroad, part of Gould's syndicate. And they completed it in 1909, November 1st, right here at Keddie, right here in Plumas County. That's where the gold spike for the Western Pacific Railroad was driven. Now, unfortunately, when the railroad started, they were kind of at a disadvantage. In 1916, with the opening of the Panama Canal, they went bankrupt, and a new company was formed. And that company was successful. They would go on to build a number of branch lines, including a number of them coming right here out of Plumas County. They would eventually buy several subsidiary railroads in Northern California. And in 1931, they actually did the largest single construction job on the railroads in the Depression when they pushed a new main line into Northern California to connect with the Great Northern Railway. Now, the Western Pacific, because of its origins and its competition, developed this very, very interesting personality. On one side, they never threw anything away. You'll go around our collection here and you will see cabooses, boxcars, flat cars that were built and rebuilt out of old cars that they bought in the 1910s and kept into service up to 1980. So they just wouldn't give anything away, wouldn't turn. If they could still earn a revenue dime, they used it. On the other hand, they could be very technologically advanced. They were the first large Western railroad to embrace diesel locomotives. They embraced centralized traffic control and signaling of the railroad instead of relying on each station to kind of communicate by telegraph. They had a central dispatcher. They pioneered some things in passenger travel that we'll get to in a second. And they even helped form the BART system. They built the laboratory cars that BART used to test all their componentry, and they even tested things like concrete ties and welded rail for BART. Now, one of the most famous aspects of the Western Pacific was the California Zephyr. Now, this was a famous streamlined passenger train, stainless steel cars, very first long-distance train built around these Vistadome cars right here. And the whole idea of the California Zephyr, they couldn't compete on the Chicago to California route with the Southern Pacific and the Union Pacific. They had a much faster train called the City of San Francisco. So what Western Pacific pioneered is the California Zephyr was sold as a land cruise. We're not going to get to your fastest, but it's going to be an experience. And if that sounds kind of familiar, that's very much the way Amtrak markets their long-distance trains today, or other specialty operators like the Rocky Mountaineer. And that all started right here with the Western Pacific and the California Zephyr. So one of the things that makes us kind of an interesting railroad museum is we have stuff predominantly relating to the Western Pacific, including their subsidiaries. I mentioned those little railroads. They bought little interurbans, little railroads that connected up in communities. And we have a number of things from their operations as well in our collection. Now, the Western Pacific was a pretty major railroad. It's considered the last transcontinental built, and they had a number of very large corporations that were key to their traffic base and to their construction. The famous construction company Bechtel, their very first professional contract was grading the Western Pacific line through Oroville and grading where their depot went. So that was their start. Kennecott Copper, over in the eastern end of the railroad, major shipper. Ford Motor Company had their auto plant in Milpitas on the Western Pacific. Portola, from the beginning, was a very important spot on the railroad. This was the division line between the eastern and western halves of the railroad. Always been a crew change point. In steam days, this was a huge facility. They had a large roundhouse in what's now our parking lot. They had a 2-story depot downtown. They even had a hospital here. And even into the diesel years, they got rid of the roundhouse and everything. They built the diesel shop, but this was still a major location on the railroad up until about the late 1970s for the Western Pacific, and even Union Pacific. This is still a crew change point. There were also a number of locals that would come out of here serving branch lines, all the lumber and mining here in Plumas County. The Western Pacific was vital to making that happen. It was a key to the economy around here. So, 1970s, railroad industry is changing very much. It's starting to contract. These smaller railroads like the Western Pacific, little quirky operations, are starting to disappear. And in 1980, the Union Pacific Railroad proposed to buy the Western Pacific and the Missouri Pacific. And that became finalized on January 11th, 1983. The Western Pacific disappears. So that's where we come in. February 7th, less than a month after the merger, 1983, a bunch of fans and employees of the Western Pacific get together and they found the Feather River Rail Society. And over the next year, we work with the City of Portola, we work with Union Pacific, and we take a lease on this property. And we start building what is now known as the Western Pacific Railroad Museum. And we emphasize our mission to preserve the Western Pacific, its corporate family, and the stories of its people. And that's one of the things that really, a lot of museums have the equipment, they have archives, but one of the things we always try and gather too are the human stories. We found that if we can connect, a lot of museums anymore say, oh, we're having trouble connecting with younger generations. You know what? We're having a great time here with it. Because one of the things we've discovered is if we record those human histories, if we share these stories, people relate to it, even if it happened like 100 years ago. And this railroad has some great ones. And that's one of the key things, too, to this museum is that's where we focus. We're not like California State Railroad Museum where we focus on the whole state. We're not like National Railroad Museum back in St. Louis where basically it's anything in the Midwestern U.S. We focus on this one railroad family, the Western Pacific. About 95% of the stuff you'll see here relates to that railroad directly in some way. And it allows us to tell this very complete story that we find the public can really wrap their head around. So we have an extensive archives, photographs, corporate paperwork, film footage, diagrams, you name it, even artifacts. We have a surveyor's transit in our artifact room. You can go see that later today. That was used to survey the Western Pacific up and down the Feather River Canyon. So we've got those actual tangible things that the people use. And then, of course, most prominently, we have our rolling stock collection. And some of the things we have in our collection are quite extraordinary. We have the only surviving passenger diesel from the Western Pacific. We have their first diesel locomotive they ever acquired. A troop sleeper, a favorite was somebody. We have the scout troops come and they stay in this World War II troop sleeper that is virtually untouched from when it was built. And perhaps one that's nearest and dearest to me, we have a passenger car the Western Pacific owned that during the Korean War was used as a rolling blood bank and is credited with saving thousands of lives. And that's over in our diesel shop. These are all major pieces. In fact, we've had folks from the Smithsonian Institute saying, hey, that car should really be with us. No, that car should be home. And, of course, something we're very proud of is last year we reached a major milestone in a 16-year restoration, and we restored the only operable Western Pacific steam locomotive, Western Pacific 165, which did operate here in Portola. So there's only four other steam engines left in the Western Pacific. This is the only one that's being restored to operate, and it lives right here. We have a number of other restoration projects going on. Several of our locomotives are getting repair work, new radiators, upgrades to their engines. When you came in, you probably saw a caboose we're in the process of repainting right now, 1642. And this locomotive right here, 705, is slated to get paint next. And this car right here that you're in, this is a California Zephyr diner car. It is the last intact diner car from the California Zephyr. It's built in 1948. And we recently got a $6,000 grant to redo the tables and chairs in here. So they're actually out getting looked at, getting worked on. And then we're going to follow that into repainting and redoing. We've been redoing all the electrical in this car and just return it to a showpiece. So something else we've been working very, very hard on because there's an aspect. I mentioned the Western Pacific being an economic engine for the region, being so vital to the economy. That's something we've realized our museum has become as well to Plumas County, and something we take very seriously. So we've been pumping up our advertising, pumping up our outreach to the community. A few years ago, we ran billboards in Reno, and that got a lot of attention. We're starting to do more viral marketing. And we're looking to get things like bringing in tour groups. So some of you got here early. You noticed we just had 86 people on 2 tour buses come over from Reno. And that's something we keep building up, and you'll see some of the things we'll show in a few minutes. We're gearing up to expand this facility not only to protect our equipment, but to handle more people, bring in larger crowds, which then will turn around and cascade into the community. And we'll have more people staying at our hotels, using our restaurants, enjoying our beautiful land around here. And pardon me for saying our. I've been volunteering up here for going on 39 years. So although I don't live here in the community, I've been a part of it for a majority of my life, and I feel very tied to it. So some of you who know I don't live here, please forgive me for... So one of the things is we keep tracking our impact, and it's very surprising over the years. We track our impact of the tourism economy here. We're currently, and for many years have been ranked one of the top tourist draws in Plumas County. In fact, going by various metrics you use to figure out economic impact when you know your number of people coming in, there's been times when we look at the total tourism economy of Plumas County, and we're accounting for almost 10% of it some years. You go and look online, and often when you say things to do in Plymouth County, we pop up number 1 or number 2, usually number 1. So we know that we're getting a lot of attention for the region, and we're very important to the region. So that has led us to take on long-term planning for developing this property. We don't want to do it haphazardly. We want to do it in a way that not only benefits, like I said, not only benefits us, but benefits the greater community as well. And we've actually gotten enough attention where we've gotten some pretty heavy-duty help in that. So you notice this drawing, there's a name up here, EHDD Architecture. That's an architecture firm out of San Francisco that has been doing pro bono consulting with us on our master planning to help keep us going in a very professional direction. Now, you may not know the name, but you've probably heard of the Exploratorium in San Francisco. You've probably heard of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, the Science and Museum and Industry with the Space Shuttle exhibit down in Los Angeles. That's EHDD. That's the caliber of work they do. And actually, the guys working on those projects have been helping us with this. So we're very, very grateful to them for their assistance. So that brings us to our master plan and our need for capital improvement. And it's something we're working very, very hard on. Because not only do we need to build out the facility, add more protection for equipment, but there's also infrastructure needs. You know, adding these buildings, expanding out the things we need, we're going to need to improve the sewers here. We're going to improve the electrical, the water. And we've been pushing the last few years on many fronts to make this happen and raise the money for it. And I'm happy to say that over the last few years, we've been starting to get some real traction. So over 2 years, we received a staggered donation from one person of $310,000, our largest single donation to date. And that has been used to do things like upgrade our diesel shop. We rebuilt our balloon track completely from the ground up. And then we've been improving. Some of you know our store from years past. You go in and see our store. That's been completely rebuilt. We're working on getting the roof of the diesel shop. The diesel shop was built in 1954. It needs a new roof. We're getting that done. We're going to redo the concrete here on the west end of the building. That $310,000 is doing a lot of basic infrastructure work that this whole facility needs. But we got bigger plans. And this building is the next big one we want to do. So this is a rendering and a plan drawing for a 20,000 square foot display building that would go in the west end of our parking lot. Be named after the longest serving president of our, Frederick Whitman. And when completed, it's kind of neat the way we're doing it. This is just a simple steel building kit. And about 7 years ago, we were contacted by a company called Olympia Steel Building, and they said, we've got a 100 by 200 square foot building. Somebody already bought 60% of it, and then they canceled the order. We want to sell it to you 40 cents on the dollar, 10 years, no interest. So we took a risk. We said, we're going to do it. And eventually, we want to top it with a facade. That's a replica of the ferry terminal that Western Pacific had in Oakland, California. So we're just going to take this very simple building, but we're going to put this architecture on that reflects the railroad. And we thought, okay, we're taking this big risk. Well, I'm happy to say that risk is paying off because I can publicly announce today that thanks to Congressman Lamalfa's office, California District 1, we have secured a $1 million grant to build Phase 1 of the Whitman Display Building. Now, one of the things we've done with this building is in keeping with wanting to make it something that can economically and socially benefit the community, it's not just going to be a train display building. We're actually going to set up the tracks so that when the trains go away, that flange way the wheels roll in, that actually pops up and is flat. So we can use it as an event center for the community. You're talking about having a concert, Jim? We can have an indoor concert here. We can have basketball and volleyball tournaments. You know, we want to have like a regional event up here in Portola. Like, you know, hey, the statewide volleyball tournament for the high schools, they can do it in here. We have the room. Now, on a more somber note, something we hope we never have to use, but sadly we seem to need it here. We can use it as an evacuation center. We've been talking with Sheriff Hagwood. Now we're hoping to talk to current OES here in Plumas County and have this set up so that we can deploy. We're going to have storage box cars on display track. Well, those storage is going to be stuff to support an evacuation center, or we could even do a mass casualty center here, which is something we want to talk to Eastern Plumas Health about. So this building, when we get it built, when we get it completed, this is going to be a game changer, not just for us here at the museum, but hopefully something for the community as well. And we want to use it as an anchor to continue building out and expanding the entrance to the museum and then eventually the rest of the museum. So here you see that Whitman building, and eventually this will all be a paved parking lot. We'll have a replica depot. And one of the things that we're trying to do too with all this, while we're doing all this planning and doing all this build out, is we don't want to lose the essential character of this facility. This is a historic facility. We love the hands-on, we love kind of the rough and tumble of it. So we're trying to find the balance between building this out and keeping that. That's why that depot is actually going to be based on one the Western Pacific had in the Feather River Canyon in Paxton. We have plans for other buildings that would be patterned after their shops they had in Stockton. So all these things aren't just going to be random things we throw up. They're all going to reflect the story and the architecture of the railroad. Now, on more basic things, we have plans for new bathrooms. We're going to take a few rooms out of the diesel shop and put in high-capacity, modern restrooms. And this is one we're also currently working on money for. We've got several grants out. We're looking for about $120,000 for this. To continue the Whitman building, we have another $400,000 grant that is going in next month. We're also looking to expand our ride. We have a very short ride here, and we want to give people a longer experience. So, to achieve that goal, we've been in discussions with the Portola 192 group. And we have been discussing the potential donation of several parcels of land that will allow us to eventually extend our track about 1.5 miles to the west. And I want to thank John and Orrin here personally. They have been incredibly supportive of us. And I'm very glad they could make it here today. Thank you so much. They see our expansion, our improvements, as very complementary to what they want to do. And we have a lot of the same things we need to work together on. So we've been having discussions quite a bit and working on our mutual concerns. And the hope is that we can work together with the city, the county, and our state representatives and make all this happen. So we've even got an idea. This is a very long-term one. But we actually had one of our members of the surveyor take a look, and he figured out that something we might be able to cooperate with the city on is actually extending a line into Old Town. And that raises some very interesting possibilities. You know, we of course, anyone who's spent time around here, we know that parking in Old Town, if we have some kind of thing going on, can be very problematic. Sometimes getting people back and forth. But now imagine if we could have folks out here at the museum and be able to bring them back and forth between Old Town and the museum without having them clog up the roads. That might be something that we could find is beneficial to both of us. And it'd be a pretty exciting thing. One thing that's very nice is when you can have like a museum excursion ride and you actually have places you stop. People get excited about that. They like that. So longer term plans, I mentioned, somewhere's the off button, there we go. Longer term plans, we have plans for a 360-foot long building. And this one would be very unique because it's long enough where the idea is each track would represent a decade. So each track would have a train on it that represents 1920s, 1940s, 1950s. So you'd have a walking timeline of the railroad. And this one would be patterned after the maintenance facility that they had in the Central Valley. Now, doing all these things, doing all these expansions, again, we can bring in more people. We provide a more interesting facility and experience for them. They stay longer. They become more engaged. We already have a lot of events we do. Anyone who's been around here for a while knows our Santa trains, perennially popular. Our pumpkin trains are getting, in some cases, to be bigger than Santa trains some days. And we're looking forward to, if we can do it, maybe we could have like concerts here at the museum, or somebody mentioned a wine train, do some kind of dinner train. We can make these things happen here if we can keep this going. And that can lead to stuff like doing some of the branded events, Day Out with Thomas, National History Day, Polar Express. They have very specific requirements for what has to be at the facility before they'll do those things. Well, our plans include satisfying those requirements. So one thing, too, is I have to acknowledge the Union Pacific. None of this would be here without the work and help of the UP. In years past, they allowed us to actually take our equipment out beyond the property and go to various special events and spread the story of not only the museum, but again, the region. They're not allowing that right now, but I can announce today that we are deep in discussions with the Union Pacific about these expansions and the future of this property right here. So we are in deep discussions with them as to getting ownership of the whole property and giving us a firm foundation to make all this happen. So that's our little overview. At this point, we're going to take some questions and answers. Then we'll give you folks a few minutes to go out and hit the bathroom, whatever. And then I'm going to take you all on about a 30-minute walking tour, show you a little more in depth some of this stuff. And then we're going to split you into 3 groups. We're going to give you a ride on our little train. We're going to let you go in the cab of the locomotive. Matt is going to take some folks for a ride on his motor car. And then we'll also have Greg and a few of our other directors together. You can do some one-on-one Q&A and just generally look around the museum. So again, thank you all. I very much appreciate you taking the time to come here and hit me.
Well, I'll give you a blessing. Congratulations on what you're doing. I've always said, when in doubt, return to factory specs. I have a T-shirt I made for that. And if you look at different cities and places that may have gotten a little soft, if you can simply look at what used to make you successful, I mean, this is going to rock. I can see that already.
You know, there was one of the things is as we were building up this museum, talking so much, again, not only former employees who were part of the museum, but folks who just lived around here. And they always talked about how vital the Western Pacific was to the economy and just the community here. And we just thought, you know what? We want to be the extension of that. So thank you. Yes, definitely.
It doesn't matter if it's your, your chainsaw, your car, your marriage, return it to factory specs and should work again.
Any other questions?
Can you talk a little about the timing of when these things happen? I know some are more longer term.
So one of the things we tried to do with the plan is phase it in such a way where we can, if something crops up, like if someone were to come to us tomorrow and say, oh, I've got the money to like build your track to the west, you know, we can move on it. A lot of it does depend on the money. But timing on things we've gotten the money on. So the $310,000 donations I mentioned, that's all going on starting now. Things like the walkways where we can only do it off season, we've got that planned for this fall. The Whitman building. Right now I'm talking, and it's actually something I forgot to mention in there, I'm actually talking to a couple of general contractors here who are talking about partnering up to be our master GC on the project. So one of the things we're going to be doing is a lot of the construction on that building is going to be done here with local labor. We're trying to keep it here in county. And our goal is by the time we, get the last paperwork on the grant taken care of, we've got everything with the GC, we've talked to the city, with all the permits and all that straight out, we're hoping that later this summer, early this fall is when we finally break ground. So that's the $1 million is our phase 1 money on that. What that should hopefully get us to is a functional building with like a roof and a foundation. And then the next $400,000, when that comes through, that should complete the shell of the building, start getting us our internal utilities. And then we're hoping for a phase 3, which will complete that facade you saw and add things like the restrooms So the grand total, if we keep the money going, we're hoping that's about a 3 to 4 year timeline on that.
That next 400,000, where are you seeking that from?
That's we have an application into. We're talking to actually a couple of foundations. The one that looks most likely we'll get money from is called the North American Railway Foundation. They're a group of basically railroaders. It's a railroad support organization, but they also support museums. And in talking with them, the fact that we've gotten this $1 million, again, thank you, District 1, Congressman Kiley. We worked very hard with him on that one. They're really liking the fact there's already that money, and they're going to be building onto this major project. So that's where we're hoping the next set's going to come from. But we're looking at other options too, because you never know. You know, somebody could change their mind. But we got several options we want to look at, including we know there's some state programs and all that. You know, probably come knocking on. Probably knocking on your door. Yes.
Comment about the UP and the real estate department for this. We're in discussion with UP's real estate to buy this.
Yes.
Actually, that's the major cornerstone, is getting the property purchased from the UP. We are in negotiations with UP on everything but the portion that belongs to the city for the sewer.
Yeah. Yeah, so the hope is, well, UP runs on their own schedule, but the indications we're getting from them is we may be able to have that settled within the year and have the future of this property in our hands fully.
Are they doing maintenance on the property right now?
No.
Because that's where there would be the benefit to them possibly if they had a place where, hey, we're going to do maintenance, but by all means go have fun.
We're on a lease from them right now, but being that we can't just go and start breaking ground for a woodland building. We got to get UP's blessing before we can even approach the county or the city for permitting. Yeah. So we've been, is it almost 2 years we've been talking to UP on this?
About 3.
We're finally at the point where UP is, you know, we've entered a bid on what the property is that we want to buy from them, and they're in the process of reviewing it. They want to know, one of their questions was how much track was here when we started the lease, what's here now. You know, they're trying to figure out how much skin we have in the game. Well, we've actually got a lot of skin in the game because we put $33,000 in on rail and tire replacement on the balloon track 2 summers ago. We've added half a dozen switches, extended rail, and done ongoing maintenance on the diesel shop. We've got 2 new doors on the east end, doors repaired, motors fixed for electric doors on the west end. We've already had D&D roofing come out and patch the roof to get us through to the point where we go to do the major roof work. So yeah, we do have skin in the game here, and it's a liability that they're seriously looking at letting go. The fact that we are not planning on any major changes, that it will stay as it is, a railroad museum. The mitigation on the pollution that they had to monitor water wells out here for so many years, 2 decades?
Oh, at least.
Maybe even 3 by now. Anyway, the fact that we're not changing our footprint for what's going to happen out there, that means that they're going to be more likely to work with us for releasing us from the lease and allowing us to buy the property. Because at that point, they aren't going to be on the hook for a 37-acre remediation like they got hooked down in Sacramento at California State Railroad Museum. So the UP has been generous to us from day one, and they're still we're still on good enough terms that we're talking to them on the purchase of the property. So once we have control of the property, we can then go to the county, the city, and the general contractors and say, all right, we want this building here. We now own the property. We need to start working on the permitting, environmental protection, impact report. Once, and like you said, by the end of the year, hopefully we'll have negotiated a price for the sale of this campus to the Feather River Rail Society.
We are actually also doing a parallel track because obviously we want to get that building moving. So we are parallel, if that takes longer to negotiate that, is just getting their permission to start the building. So we're hopefully leaving nothing to chance here and we can keep all this moving. All right. Well, I'm going to take down the screen here, and if anybody wants to take a look in the kitchen area of this car, you're more than welcome to turn the lights on. We have some more refreshments. Like I said, you got about 15 minutes here. You can go use the restroom, talk a little bit, ask some questions, and then we'll be assembling out in the diesel shop, and I'll take you on a little tour around and show you stuff close up.
Thank you.
Thank you.